The night in Cedar Pines was darker than usual. Thick gray clouds rolled across the sky, blotting out the moon, while winds whistled through the bare branches like warning cries. Snowflakes, heavy and relentless, whipped against windows and buried rooftops under inches of white powder. Roads had vanished beneath ice and snow, and even the bravest drivers had pulled their cars off to the side, resigned to waiting out the blizzard. At the far edge of the town stood Eleanor Green's farmhouse. Built in the early 1900s, it had weathered storms far worse than this. Its wooden frame creaked under the wind's pressure, but the chimney puffed steadily, a plume of smoke curling upward against the storm. Inside, the old woman kept her home warm with the steady crackle of a log fire. Eleanor, a widow in her late 70s, had lived alone for over a decade. Her days were quiet now, mornings spent tending to her garden when the season allowed, afternoons knitting scarves for the church charity, evenings reading on her old rocking chair with her cat nestled in her lap. She had no children, but the whole town knew her as Grandma Ellie. That night, she sat by the fire with a steaming cup of chamomile tea, her knitting basket at her feet. Outside, the storm raged mercilessly. "This one feels worse than the blizzard of '85, she muttered to herself, her voice barely audible above the wind's howl. She was about to rise and check the latch on the back door when a faint sound caught her ear. At first, she dismissed it as a trick of the storm. But then, there it was again, a low rumble, like thunder, except it grew louder, closer. She shuffled to the window, pulled aside the curtain, and squinted through the frost-coated glass. Her eyes widened. Headlights, not one, but many, cut through the snow. Dark figures on motorcycles slowly made their way up her driveway, engines struggling against the drifts. Their silhouettes looked like shadows out of some wild dream. Leather jackets, helmets, boots, and the unmistakable gleam of chrome under snowflakes. "Good heavens," Eleanor whispered. "Who on earth would be out on a night like this?" Within minutes, 15 motorcycles stood parked haphazardly near her porch. Their riders dismounted, their movements stiff from the cold. Some stamped their boots to shake off the snow, others pulled off helmets, revealing bearded faces, tattoos, and sharp eyes that scanned the farmhouse. They looked intimidating, like the sort of men she had seen in movies, the ones mothers warned their children to avoid. Yet what Eleanor noticed was not menace, but weariness. Their faces were red from the biting cold, their hands trembling, their breath visible in ragged clouds. They were travelers caught in a storm, desperate for shelter. The leader, a tall man with a thick black beard and a jacket emblazoned with a winged skull, approached her porch. He knocked gently, almost too gently for a man his size. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She opened the door wide, and a blast of icy wind swept into her home. The men looked at her in surprise. "Well, don't just stand there freezing," she said firmly, her eyes kind but commanding. "Get in before you turn into icicles." The men exchanged glances. One muttered, "Ma'am, we don't wanna cause trouble." "Nonsense," Eleanor interrupted. "The only trouble here is you letting all the warm air out. Inside, all of you. Boots off on the rug." Reluctantly at first, the bikers stepped into her living room. The warmth of the fire hit them like a wave, and their stiff posture softened. Snow melted off their jackets, dripping onto the floor. They shuffled awkwardly, clearly unused to such hospitality. Eleanor bustled about with surprising energy for her age. Sit down, sit down. You look half frozen. The fire's strong, but it'll take a minute to thaw those bones." She grabbed extra quilts from a chest and began draping them across broad shoulders. One of the younger bikers, barely in his 20s, whispered, "Lady, you don't even know us." Eleanor looked him straight in the eye. "I know enough. You're cold, tired, and hungry. That's all I need to know tonight." The leader cleared his throat. "We're on our way to Sturgis. Got caught off guard by the storm. Wasn't expecting, well, this." His voice was rough, but there was gratitude in it. Eleanor smiled. "Storms don't ask permission. Now, you'll need something hot. I've got soup on the stove." Minutes later, the smell of simmering chicken noodle filled the room. Eleanor set her small dining table with mismatched bowls and mugs. The bikers hesitated before sitting, men used to roadside diners and suspicion, not homely kitchens and checkered tablecloths. Yet hunger soon won. They ate quietly at first, then heartily, until every pot and pan had been scraped clean. In between bites, conversation sparked. One biker noticed her old piano in the corner. Used to play one of those, he said softly, fingers twitching as though remembering forgotten notes. Another offered to chop more firewood. A third fixed the squeaky hinge on her front door without being asked. Eleanor moved among them with ease, like a grandmother fussing over grandchildren. More tea. Careful with that chair, it wobbles. And don't you leave those wet gloves on my radiator. Her scolding carried warmth, not annoyance. As the storm howled outside, the farmhouse grew into a haven. The fire crackled, the bikers' laughter slowly filled the room, and the walls echoed with the unlikely harmony of strangers becoming guests. Later that night, as the men spread out across the living room floor, bundled in blankets, Eleanor watched them with quiet contentment. Her cat, cautious at first, now curled happily on the lap of the youngest rider. For the first time in a long while, her home felt full again. And for the first time in a long while, those 15 bikers felt like they belonged somewhere. When dawn broke, the storm had passed. The air was crisp, the snow glistened under the rising sun, and the world seemed reborn. Eleanor stirred her tea as the bikers prepared to leave, each of them thanking her with deep sincerity. One large biker named Jack clasped her hand gently and said, "Ma'am, you'll never know what this meant to us. We won't forget it." She simply smiled. "Kindness is never wasted, dear. Pass it on when someone else needs it." The bikers mounted their motorcycles and roared away down the snow-dusted road. Eleanor watched them disappear, thinking that would be the end of it. But the next morning, when she opened her curtains, her eyes widened in disbelief. Her entire front yard, driveway, and even the street beyond were filled with motorcycles, not just 15, but nearly 100 of them. Men and women, young and old, all in biker gear, stood silently in the snow. One by one, they removed their helmets and placed them respectfully at their sides. Their leader, Jack, stepped forward and explained. "Word spread through our chapters about what you did for us last night. Nobody opens their door for people like us. But you did. And for that, every one of us wanted to be here, to show you that your kindness matters." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes as she looked at the sea of bikes lined up outside her modest home. It wasn't fear she felt, but overwhelming gratitude. The bikers had brought food, firewood, and supplies. Some even carried envelopes of money to help with her bills. That morning, the old woman realized that her single act of kindness had created ripples far greater than she imagined. In a world where people often judged by appearances, she had chosen compassion, and it had come back to her 100-fold. Moral of the story: never judge people by how they look. A single act of kindness, no matter how small, can touch countless lives and come back multiplied.